Hi, everyone. I'm Adam. I'm one of the product managers here on the Forge team at Atlassian. And today I'm going to chat to you about extensibility, what that means, and how we're driving that forward with the Forge platform. First up, we'll dial things right back and explain what we mean by extensibility and why it's so important to Atlassian and our products. I'll then run through a bit of a history on extensibility at Atlassian because it's just gives you some really important insight into what we're trying to achieve with Forge. And then we'll dive a bit deeper into how we think about the design principles for extensibility in Forge. And towards the end, we'll wrap up with what we're working on today to grow extensibility and where we can expect that to take us into the future. So let's get into it. What is extensibility and why is it so important? Put simply, extensibility is designing your products in a way that allows for the easy addition of new capabilities. You can see that internally between Atlassian products and the ways that they extend each other. And you can also see it, obviously, from folks like yourselves in our developer community who extend our products in a variety of ways. It all started way back when with developers tinkering on the Jira source code itself. And it's evolved a couple of times over time into officially documented and supported extension points. Those extension points can be part of a product UI, or they can be background tasks that automate parts of a workflow, or really anything that affects the user journey in an Atlassian product. So, simple example of that might be a widget on a dashboard that just displays some useful data to a user. It might be something a bit more sophisticated that takes up a whole screen that you can navigate to from somewhere else in the product. It might be something like a macro on a Confluence page, which a user can add to some content we're creating to sort of make it more dynamic. And definitely check out Megan's talk later on around choosing modules for Confluence Forge apps if you want to learn all about macros and Confluence extensibility. Well, lastly, as I said, it could be something that's completely invisible to the user that just works behind the scenes to automate tasks and get jobs done. It's all about extending and complementing the user's journey. And it's a huge part of Atlassian's success. It's what makes our products great. We make products which are a great fit for a lot of teams, but with the help of extensibility, we can make those products a perfect fit for a specific team and optimize workflows to really tailor towards individual needs of teams because every team is different. And that's great for us as product teams at Atlassian because we can work on those core common needs of the collective user base and rely on folks like yourselves in our developer community to address the use cases that we don't. So that might be because they're a little bit niche and they only apply to a segment of our customer base, or it could just be those things on the backlog that realistically we're never going to get to, no matter how optimistic we are as product managers. So all this means that Atlassians are a great fit. Atlassian products rather are a great fit for more customers, and the customers that we have get a lot more out of our products and unlock even more value. So let's have a look at a couple of real Forge apps as an example. It's a bit more interesting than a screen mock-up. And so I'll take a look at a couple of my favorites. Firstly, you'll notice a few extra fields on the right-hand side here that you get in your standard Jira issue. And it's from an app called Custom Field Suite on the marketplace, which is this sort of array of useful and fun custom field types for Jira. And so whether you want to show a progress bar or a star rating, traffic lights, or your team prefers to do t-shirt sizes rather than story points, then you can now customize Jira to what works for you. And this one's free, so definitely get on the marketplace and check it out. And coming over to easy issue and subtask templates, it's one you have to click the button at the top of the issue. It opens up this panel down below. And it's a useful tool with different templates for creating issues and subtasks at the click of a button. So if you find yourself, always creating the same set of subtasks for a certain style of Jira issue, then this just automates that process for you. So take some of the tediousness out of sitting through backlog grooming, so you can be more present and focus on those important discussions and things like that, rather than working with the tool and keying in data. And then let's take another look at one of my favorite apps. It's called Hedge. And this is one of those apps that takes up a whole screen because it's a little bit more advanced, but it's still quite simple, and it's a risk management tool. And it's sort of built on top of your Jira project, and it saves all your risks as Jira issues. You can come in and sort of create new risks for your risk register. It saves it with this issue type of risk, which is cool. And then, you can add the likelihood of that risk, the consequence, and based on the settings that you've set up, it'll then give it a risk score. And, you can order them different ways and chat about them as a team. You can go into the reporting, which gives you this cool dashboard, and you can see how they compare and trend over time and everything else. So just a great example of how you can extend Jira to add this sort of extra functionality. And it's great that your risk register can live where you're already managing the rest of your work, rather than some of the dodgy spreadsheets I've definitely been guilty of using in the past. And finally, jump over to Confluence, because I just want to show one of our favorite Forge apps that we use internally in the Forge team, and it's called the Decision Helper. You can grab that from the marketplace as well. It's free. It's from Atlassian Labs. And what that is a macro that you can add to your Confluence pages where you're making a decision, and it just adds this lightweight workflow to that page. So super useful in the new remote world with team anywhere and everything else, and you're trying to make async decisions. This just makes that super easy. And so you can add Confluence users as the people driving the decision, who's contributing, who's being informed, and those people will be notified and everything else, which is cool. And then once you've finished setting up all the people, you can add things like a due date. You can start tracking towards that. When do we need this decision made by? And eventually you can start that process for the decision making. So you can see the progress bar moves along. It adds comments to the page as sort of an audit trail for progress that's been made. And importantly, it tags those users as well. So they'll get Confluence notifications that they're required as part of this decision, and they're continually getting up, notified as the decision works its way through the flow. Just another simple example about how something fairly straightforward can be really powerful when you couple it up with the features that are already in Confluence. So now that we understand a little bit about what extensibility is and what extension points are, let's take that little trip back through time and the history of extensibility at Atlassian. So as I said, it goes right back to the early days, and grew really organically in response to our customers finding unofficial ways to extend our products. So paying customers used to have access to the product source code for Jira, and then these customers could implement whatever changes they want, rebuild the source code, and deploy the modified versions. And while that was super powerful, you may imagine that caused several problems. You had to be, super into the Confluence or Jira space and expertise to make changes. They're a real mess to maintain. And, every time there was a new version of Jira or Confluence, you had to rework your customization or at least reapply it. And so just didn't scale very well. So eventually we released Atlassian plugins, which then allowed you to write your own code as a standalone binary and interact with Atlassian products that way. And obviously that's a huge improvement over modifying the source code directly, but still reasonably brittle. Legend has it that MCB, one of our founders, Mike Cannon-Brooks, wrote a new version of reloadable plugins on a flight from Australia to the US one day. And eventually that evolved into the second version of Atlassian plugins, so then became known as P1 and P2, which you may still see references to. And the thing about server customizations is that servers, sit in your own infrastructure behind your own VPN and firewall. And so they had this natural safety barrier when it came to data egress. So security was less of an issue for those customizations. And also, if your customization happened to perform poorly, then it really only affected you and your instance. So didn't have some of the issues that we have in the cloud where you get this noisy neighbor problem and we have to worry about all of our customers. So because security and performance were less of a concern at a platform level, it meant that you could do some really deep customizations on the server product, and you could bypass a bunch of controls and change the product's experience really significantly. The downside, of course, being that you could also break it really significantly. But then Atlassian started on its journey to the cloud, and this multi-tenanted environment, meaning there's multiple customers running on the same machines. And so it was no longer feasible to let developers inject their arbitrary Java code directly into our product, because it would also affect the experience of other customers. It also require a level of permission in the cloud that would be a little bit dangerous if it fell into the wrong hands. So that's why we came up with Atlassian Connect, which provided a level of isolation that meant an app installed by one customer wouldn't ruin the experience of other customers if it went haywire. It used the Connect plugin, and that acted as a middleman between the Atlassian product and the external web services that ran the apps. It was also great for Jira admins because there was a less burden for them to get things right, knowing that bad implementation of their app couldn't bring down their entire instance of Jira. So the sandbox isolation was great, but that also came with its own downsides. So it couldn't offer the same extensibility coverage that we had in server, just because of the extra latency of using third-party web services. Just meant certain types of extension points weren't really possible anymore. The perceived app speed wasn't quite as good. And so again, just those remote iframes and remote web services just were a bit slower. And, it put this high barrier to getting started building apps for Atlassian. So you had to host the app yourself, you had to figure out security and everything else. So that was a real pain point as well. And that's what led us to Forge. So Forge is a platform that allows us to bring some of that deep extensibility back to the cloud from server. And it also addresses some of those fundamental pain points in Connect around performance and the high cost of getting started. So because Forge is hosted in the Atlassian cloud, it means your app is a lot closer to our products and that code, and also reduces that cost of getting started because we do all the hosting for you. It's been designed from the ground up to be a great developer experience. It's not something that's evolved from developers organically hacking the product. And so, you can get your first app deployed in just a few commands from the Forge CLI tool, which is really cool. It has this default level of trust because your app is hosted in the Atlassian cloud and data egress is controlled and limited. And it's just a lot more consistent because of the way it's been designed from the ground up. So again, it hasn't just evolved and evolved. We've been able to be a bit more thoughtful about how we define things like extension points. So that should lead to a better experience for developers and customers using these apps as well. So speaking of that design, that leads us to, specifically speaking about extensibility in Forge and some of our thinking behind how we do that. So first up, one of the big differences with Forge is that we think about extension points based on behavior rather than a specific location in the UI. So for example, on that Jira issue screen, we have an issue action extension point rather than the issue meatball menu or the issue task menu or something like that. This design gives us sort of this level of declarative abstraction, which is great because it means that our product teams can make changes to our core products. You can make changes to your app, and hopefully those experiences won't break for customers. So it's almost like an API contract where something can change on either side, but the contract stays the same. And so user experiences don't break. Often the difference between a behavior and a UI location can be a little bit nuanced, and it can be tricky to get right. For example, homepage feed sounds like we're talking about a specific UI location, but what it actually refers to is the behavior of easily adding digestible content to a default opening page. So, that page and that experience may change over time, but when it does evolve, it'll do so in a way that apps that use that extension point still make sense. And then when you're thinking about designing extension points, they fit into these two main categories, which I touched on earlier. They can be in the UI, which display in the product front end. And that's examples like the general pages, custom fields, macros, anything you can see and interact with. And then there's the backend extension points, which don't have a UI element, but typically enable your code to be evaluated when a certain thing happens. So we have product triggers, which happen when a product event occurs, like an issue gets created or deleted. We have web triggers, which allows you to invoke a Forge function from a remote service. There's schedule triggers, which run on a schedule and invoke some code. And then there's things like workflow validators as well, which fire when, say, a Jira issue transitions from one state to another. From there's another way we can slice and dice our extension points, and we can do that by something we call the lifecycle, which either happens at an installation level or an instance level. And both UI and backend extension points can fit into either of these buckets as well. The installation level extension point is probably the simplest one to think about. It's like a general page, like Hedge that we saw earlier. Once you install it, it's there. You can get to it from the nav, and that's pretty straightforward. The instance level extension points mean that you need to first install it, but then you need to add that particular thing to another thing. So what I mean by that is, for example, the macro. You install an app that has a macro extension point. You don't necessarily see it straight away. What you need to do is then create a page in Confluence and add that macro to a page. So that's why it's instance level. And there may be multiple instances of a macro, within an installation. So a workflow validator is another example. So, you may assign a workflow validator to, different workflows. And now this is just a quick example of how an app would declare which extension points they want to use and what happens when they're invoked. In Forge, an extension point maps to what we call a module. And all Forge apps have this thing called a manifest file. And in the manifest file, you declare which modules you're using. So the modules of definition, the module definitions include things like what type of module it is, as well as specific properties like which function to call when it gets invoked, what's the title that displays if it's a panel in the UI, that kind of thing. A single app can have multiple modules of the same type, like you could have multiple different custom fields, and they can also have different types of modules. So you might have some custom fields, and then you might have an admin page where the user can explore or configure those fields. Yeah, so that's as deep as we're going to go into the code in this talk. But if you want to take that a little bit further, then definitely check out Ben's talk later on innovation and dog fooding with the Atlassian Karma bot, which is really cool. So moving right along, now that we know how extensibility works in the Forge world, let's talk a little bit about what we're up to today and where we're headed in the future. Firstly, our main focus at the moment is really building out our extension points and functionality to catch up with Connect. I mentioned earlier that Connect had a narrower breadth of extension points than Server, but they're still pretty broad, as you can see, and we're still catching up. So we're rebuilding everything from the ground up with Forge, and that just takes a little bit of time. And the good news is, we are starting to get quite close, and certainly our coverage is really strong amongst the popular modules. if you take a look at, say, the Jira issue ones, they're all green. So there's plenty of cool stuff you can do with Forge. And just to add a little bit more context to this slide, anything that I've labeled blue is either being worked on right now as roadmap for this quarter or the coming quarter, next quarter. So you can see sort of by the end of this year, we expect to be pretty green across most of this page, and hopefully we'll reach full parity by the end of our financial year, which is the end of June 2023. One more thing that I'll touch on this slide in particular with regard to extension points is the web panels and web items, and they exist both in Jira and Confluence and Connect. And a web panel is a specific location on a page that you can surface your app, and a web item is basically a specific location in a menu. And if you've been paying attention, we don't design extension points that way in Forge. So we won't be bringing those across one for one as they exist in Connect to Forge, but we will be paying close attention to the most popular ones and making sure that you can achieve the same use cases in Forge. And so they'll come across as different modules. And you may have seen some of those already. So yeah, just keep a close eye on those. And then, so one question we get all the time is how do we prioritize what we're working on and which extension points we build first? This is a glance at one of the tools we use as a big input for that, which is called Habitat. Of course, it sits on top of a Jira project. And it basically lists out all the different features of Connect, not just extension points, but APIs and events and everything else. And we can track how many marketplace apps are using those, how many installations does it affect, and order our prioritization that way. So it is something that we take that we place a lot of emphasis on, and we try and unlock the most use cases as quickly as we can. Of course, there's always factors that impact our roadmaps. It means we can't always work on things as perfect foresight as we'd like, but this is one of the big factors. And we're not completely 100% focused on just catching up to Connect parity. We are looking at some of those more interesting extension points that can bring some of that deep extensibility back from server to the cloud. And this is an example of issue adjustments, although I think hot off the press being named to UI adjustments, which allows you to really deeply customize the issue screens in Jira and change the name of existing fields or hide existing fields based on certain parameters and things like that. So it's cool to also be starting to kind of test the boundaries of what's possible in Forge and push past what was capable in Connect as well. And then, as mentioned in the keynote earlier, another thing we're working really hard on is realizing the platform vision for Forge and getting it across to more products. So while we've been extending our coverage in Jira and Confluence, we also announced support for Jira Service Management earlier this year. And in the keynote as well, Adash touched on Compass, which is a new developer experience platform that's in alpha at the moment, and it has been built with Forge from the ground up. So it already has extension points, and there's going to be some really cool opportunities to innovate in some new space there. And as well as that, we're still working hard to bring Forge to our more mature products like Bitbucket and Trello. And then, not stopping there, it's not just getting across all of Atlassian's products we're trying to do, it's getting across all the surfaces as well. And Forge Mobile is going to be a really cool opportunity to do that. On this slide, for example, you can see what our decision helper app might look like in a mobile context. And you can imagine being on the train or the bus and you get pinged when someone's adding you as the owner of a decision. You open up that page on your phone, you're going to want to see that macro and being able to see the current status of the decision and who else is being informed and everything else. And maybe you can go ahead and approve that page before you even get into the office. So being able to meet people where they work is really exciting. And it's not just bringing existing web functionality over to mobile, it's also this possibility of new extension points and use cases as well. So how could you take advantage of the camera on the phone, location, potentially, things like that. And finally, just before I finish, I'd love for you to help us prioritize the future of Forge. This is our public Forge project. It's just a Jira project where you can go and add feature suggestions and raise bugs that you find. It's another one of the tools that we have that is an important part of building our roadmaps. And I'd really love as many people as possible to go in there and give us your ideas. And please don't just raise new issues. If you see other issues there that are existing that are really important to you and your apps, please vote for those as well. And don't just vote, even if you could leave a comment on that issue and tell us your use case and exactly how you want to use that particular feature or idea. That's super valuable for us when we come to actually designing it and making sure that it works for the most people. We'll always have way more suggestions than we can ever deliver, and that's a great problem to have. But if you can help us show your support for your favorites, it really helps us know what the most valuable things are to focus on. And at the end of the day, that's going to help us build the best platform we can. So go.atlassian.com/forge without the O, FRGE, and have your say on our future roadmap. You can also find your way there from the Forge docs on the left-hand nav. If you find the give feedback link, that'll take you directly there as well. So that brings us to the end of the chat today. I hope that gives you a bit more context on how we think about extensibility. And, the future is super exciting. We're really just, I guess, coming towards the end of reaching parity with Connect. And from there, we can really start to innovate and do some cool things. And as you see, Forge coming to more products and more platforms, and some of those deeper extension points finally come to the cloud, it's going to create a whole new world of opportunity and things. So our vision's super ambitious. There's still a lot of work to be done. But yeah, it's going to unlock an amazing amount of opportunities. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your developer day. Catch the rest of the talks, and I'll see you on the community or in the Forge project. Please give me a shout.